I like that a lot. My next question will be for Mr. Tsegaye. Welcome, Mr. Tsegaye. Would like you to consider the key factors that shareholders would consider before consenting to a mergers and acquisition.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you.
Well, shareholders are obviously going to have to consider a number of issues, and here I understand the question from a more practical, consistent with today's topic, more practical point of view. So I'm not looking at commercial considerations going into an M&A transaction. It's more from a purely technical legal point of view. There's basically a checklist that a shareholder would have to consider. A number of them are obvious. First one would be, is the transaction going to be financed through cash or shares? Why is that important? Well, as we know, if it's a share finance transaction, this will give the structuring of the transaction more flexibility. The buyer might not be so fond of this type of approach because obviously cash is more liquid and less risky. But that is often going to be a key point of discussion and very important to a shareholder. Obviously, another key consideration for a shareholder is their voting rights and shareholding post-transaction. So it's not just how much equity they will have in the company, but what sort of voting rights or political power is attached to their particular type of shares once the transaction has completed. The structure of the transaction itself is key. So is this going to be done through mostly a share or an asset sale? Because typically you could categorize transactions under these two shapes, two forms, and so each will bring different legal, tax, and economic risks. A very important one that as a shareholder, if we look at it from the perspective of a shareholder, is going to tax issue, obviously. If it's if the transaction is structured as a sale of shares, then it might be beneficial for tax purposes. Generally, globally, this type of a gain would fall under capital gains as opposed to a pure income revenue. So that's something a shareholder would bear in mind. Another critical element, of course, is management. What sort of management will be in place once the shareholders are left with this reorganized, restructured new entity? Have they been given sufficient insight into the new management? Are they happy with it? Do they think this will carry them long term and at least maintain the sort of profits they're used to, if not hopefully increase them? And also if the seller will another point is if the seller will want to continue operating in the same market, then you would have to consider non-compete, non-solicit obligations. That's going to be a key consideration as well. So I think in a nutshell, these are the key points to bear in mind from a shareholder's perspective, in my view.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this. Next, I'll now call on Mr. Tsegaye. Could you please tell us what obtains in the United Kingdom? Have there been more mergers and acquisitions, and what are the trigger factors?
Thanks. Well, in the UK, the situation has been rather bleak over the last couple of years. Unfortunately, I think we are all aware from the media of what has happened in this country. I should remind everyone I am half Ethiopian, half French, but I've been working in the UK. So this is the market I am more familiar with. And in terms of M&A transactions, over the past couple of weeks, as I was saying, it's been on a downward trajectory. Of course, this started with the Brexit and uncertainty that created in starting the downward trajectory really started to show around 2008, and then again in 2019, this uncertainty surrounding the general elections, again numbers plunged further. And so deal volumes, I have the figures from a merger market. It's from a total volume of 92 billion pounds in 2018. The first half of 2020, the value of these deals is now only 2.6 billion pounds. So it's actually very concerning. You would think that we're slowly reaching the zero level. Right now, though, there is cause for optimism. It's because these deals, most of them have come to a standstill or are not happening. Really, it's only because of uncertainty. Cash is there. The companies willing to engage and do deals are every day indicating that is what they want to do. They're begging for encouragement from the government. And the most aggressive bunch really are private equity funds, who do have enormous amounts, really keen. Lobbies and all that system here are really pushing for more government support through various forms. So, I mean, the government support right now to try and take us out of the financial and economic difficulty created by COVID has its ramifications all the way to private equity firms who rely on that to actually, hopefully starting by first half of next year, start making deals and use the cash available to as I was saying, complete potential transactions that are already in the pipeline. So, in brief, things are not looking great right now. If you were to take a snapshot of the situation now, but again, it's all of this could change very quickly and in the right ways soon.
Thank you so much. I'd just like to ask, out of curiosity, have there been any reviews or any amendments of the laws regulating mergers and acquisitions?
In the UK?
Yes. In the UK, yes.
Yes. So there have been, there has been recent legislation. It's not helpful to what I was just saying. I was just saying we're looking for encouragement from the government. Recent legislation is doing the opposite. It is protecting the English economy from what they call sovereign aggressions. Companies involved in industries involved in healthcare and health generally, is to protect them from foreign investments. The thinking is that right now England should rather consolidate what it has, and so there is proposed legislation. It hasn't been passed yet, but proposed legislation that seeks to give the government, in certain, between potential buyers and sellers. So there is that sort of legislation in the pipeline in the UK.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for the information. Mr. Tsegaye, I do have a question for you. Based on your experience, what set of disputes have arisen from mergers and acquisition transactions, and what mechanisms have been used in the resolution of disputes?
Sure, happy to address that. I do a lot of post-M&A litigation, arbitration myself. Some of the disputes have been mentioned. Ms. Ojikutu just mentioned a recent one dispute that's all over the media right now, LVMH versus Tiffany. I'll touch on that shortly. Mr. Badejo made a very important point, which is, one thing the parties need to get right is the shareholders' agreements. And the source of most M&A disputes is the shareholder agreement. It is often because, and as he said, parties tend to focus on the more positive and easier to address issues, and all the negative scenarios are not properly addressed. And so areas that will typically give rise to disagreement, the first one, usual suspect number one, is completion accounts. So the final adjusted price of the deal. What is it going to be? So M&A deals, as you know, are often agreed on the basis of the existing accounts as of the signature dates, which will then be adjusted on closing. And so a number of adjustments will happen during the interim, and the dispute will arise on that. It's mostly to do with working capital. Transactions that are structured through earnout provisions, so meaning the price will depend on future performance of the company. That mechanism, the pricing mechanism there, will give rise to disputes. And a dispute that is currently involved in the Tiffany transaction relates in one way or another about its own closing conditions. So either a party is unable to satisfy the closing conditions precedent, or simply wants to walk out of the deal for various reasons. I'm currently involved in a large M&A dispute involving a Brazilian conglomerate. The seller, actually, in that case, no longer wants to sell what it had agreed to sell, although our client, the buyer, considers that everything else all the conditions have been satisfied, and so this is giving right now rise to a very acrimonious dispute, and a lot of it, the disputed issues could have been made much narrower if we had a shareholders agreement working in our favor, and clarified certain key points. For example, clear definitions of conditions precedents. So not just vague statements of these accounts should be completed, the ratios should be met. Well, okay, state exactly what ratio at what date, exactly an example of the calculation the parties want to see satisfied. So this would actually diminish or make the scope of disputed issues much smaller.
Thank you
a
so
typical
much.
method, in two lines, maybe just two lines, the typical method for resolving these disputes is arbitration. And arbitration is used mostly in cross-border transactions. Maybe some of my colleagues here will correct me, but at least in Europe, what we see is that for deals within a country, courts will be used. And there's a preference to use courts also for when there are various parties involved in the deal. But generally, the fallback system is arbitration.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Tsegaye. Mr. Tsegaye, if you would just assist us with this question, we might have to respond to the other questions a bit later. However, there's a question. I will proceed to read the question. It says, can any one of the panelists, it says, differentiate. So the question is to differentiate in practical terms the difference between mergers and acquisitions, particularly a hostile takeover and a regular takeover bid. Can you shed some light on that, Mr. Tsegaye, please?
Sure, happy to do that. The difference would, it's pretty simple in the sense that M&A transaction, it was mentioned earlier, is supposed to be like a marriage. So it should be an alliance between two willing partners who would hopefully go through the motions, which, as explained by a number of us on the panel today, the first step being a due diligence, so trying to know each other, and then basically, agreeing the terms of their future marriage. So that's a typical M&A transaction. A hostile takeover is it's a forced M&A transaction. So I wouldn't. It's a different beast. It would generally concern a quoted company, We mentioned earlier private equity funds. So typically I don't want to point the finger to anyone in particular, but someone carrying a lot of capital who is bent towards, for some reason, has decided to purchase a particular asset. Again, the first step would be a plea or a demand for a normal, peaceful M&A transaction. But if that doesn't work, then the potential buyer will basically raid the company's share on the market. So would typically approach the company's shareholders and see if it is possible to come to an agreement with them on buying some of the target company's shares. So, you know, it's to me, a hostile takeover is simply some in circumstances where either for strategic reasons or for organic reasons, the proper course of action, so a normal M&A transaction, has either not been considered or was considered and failed. And so another shot at it would be to do a hostile takeover.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We have loads of questions. Mr. Tsegaye, I'm going to call on you to answer one more question for us before we call on Mr. Kenneth to give us closing. The question is that what would you consider as being the best form of dispute resolution? You had mentioned arbitration in the course of our discussions. We'll take it into consideration the possible hostilities that may occur.
Sure. Well, the premise of a dispute is that there are going to be several sources of hostilities. So we will be in a very hostile situation. It should be said that during negotiations of the transaction and between signing and closing and after closing, there can be disagreements, tensions and all that, and not all of them would result in proper litigation, of course. Parties are often able to solve them. But a number of them will result in actual proceedings. And so here it will depend on what the parties during negotiations in the SPA, in the shareholders agreement, what dispute resolution method they have chosen. So that will decide where we go once a dispute arises. That's why the advice would be, bearing in mind, as the question seems to suggest, that there can be different hostilities or sources of disputes, meaning different contracts can give rise to different sorts of disputes. My advice on my experience would be to go through arbitration, because arbitration is a neutral forum. There is no home court advantage. The general concern that people may have with arbitration, which is, yes, but how do you deal with the fact that a dispute between the buyer and the seller might involve a third party? And in an arbitration, the arbitrators, tribunal, will not have the power to join this third party. That is a misconception. Arbitration is able to handle this sort of thing. So it's really difficult, and really whenever the transaction has some cross-border element to it, it should be no-brainer. Arbitration should be the dispute method.
Thank you so much.